students, I'm Mr. Kelvin Tan. Welcome to Home-Based Learning once again. So in this particular home-based learning video, I will be going through with all of your case study question 2 in your International Economics notes. So if you turn to your tutorial section, right, it is the case study on India's agriculture policy. So as we go through, so this video will be basically about how do you read and dissect the various extracts in the case study, as well as a lot of tips that I'll be giving you as we go along. So let's all turn to it now. A good habit I will encourage all students to do is to look at the questions, okay? Because as I will keep emphasizing more and more that case study is basically a race against time. Okay, you have only limited time to do this case study, so that you need to you need to try a very efficient way to handle to manage your time. So if you turn to all the questions at the case study 2, right? I've listed all the questions in this slide here. So what I will encourage students to do is to make sure you highlight all the command words. Okay, so I'll give you some time to do it now. So as you can see, right, question A, there are actually two command words, estimate and compare. Okay, so in order to get both marks, make sure you address both command words. For question B is explain, C part 1 is suggest, C part 2 is explain, D is discuss, and finally E is discuss. So you can see, right, a case study has 30 marks. So it is basically split into 12 plus 18. So you can see that the last two questions, D and E, right, adds up to 18 marks. These are the higher order skills questions that require some kind of discussion, means you need to evaluate as well as to have a justified conclusion. Whereas if you look at question A, B, and C, okay, these are all lower order skills type of question where you are not required to give a justified conclusion at the end. So these are basically all the questions in this particular case study. So the objective of reading or the case study is, as you read through the question, right, your brain up here should hopefully be alerting you on the various economic concepts that will be tested in any case study they are doing. So remember, Econ's case study, right, is not like your GP paper 2. Okay, we don't need you to paraphrase the extract in your own words. Okay, we are fine with you quoting from the case, but what the examiners are really looking for is for students to apply the various economic concepts that you have been learning over the last 1.5 years to the particular question that they are being tested. So my point is this, as you read through the question, as you highlight all the command words, hopefully, right, your brain should be alerting you on the various economic concepts that are being tested in the very case study that you are attempting. Let me give you some examples. If you look at part B of your case study 2, you realize that the test on economic concept is the test on minimum price control. So this tells you, okay, I have to think, what have I learned in JC1 about minimum price, and how can I use that minimum price framework to understand how to answer a question like question B? When you look at question C, you realize that they are asking for terms of trade. So terms of trade is a concept that is found in the appendix of your International Economics notes. And when you look at D, question D, clearly it is about comparative advantage. So it makes you recall, okay, I'm supposed to recall what the law of CA is. How does that explain why countries should or should not specialize? And finally, E. Okay, E is about government policies in the agriculture markets. So if you think about what you learned in your JC1, it will be the usual price controls, subsidies, or even taxes. And of course, you can also think of micro and macro goals as well when it comes to the objectives for government policies in agriculture markets. Now, for me, for Mr. Tan, I will tell all my students that when it comes to case study questions and even as essay question, okay, so long as the command word, okay, is explained or above, that means not for a case study, right? Command words like state, command words like compare, command words like describe, command words like suggest in this particular case study, there need not be causality. But so long as the command word is explain, discuss, analyze, account, every of such questions with such command words, there tend to be cause and effect. That means something happens first, and they are asking you to explain or discuss what happens next. Okay, so as we go through each of these questions in this particular case study, I will keep bringing back this point on causality. The idea is that once you understand causality, right, it's easier for you not to misinterpret the question, not to write things that are out of point. Once you are done with reading the questions, once you are done with highlighting the command words, once you are done with your brain activating all the necessary economic concepts, let's turn back now to the extracts of the case study. So I'll just go through in a general sense each of these extracts. But the main important learning point I want to teach all of you is what are the thoughts that should be going through your brain as you read the extract. Okay, you are reading with a purpose. You are reading like an economic student. So let me give you an example of extract one. Okay, let me give you some time to read this particular extract as I take a drink of water. Ideally, as I teach all my students, since you have already read the questions before you read the extract, okay, and you are also aware of what are some of the economic concepts that are being tested in this particular case study. As you read the extract, right, ideally what you should do is this. Ask yourself, what are the case material that I can make reference in any of my questions in the case study? So if you read what I wrote in the slide, you know that there's really an 8-mark question on comparative advantage. Okay, the 8-mark question is on the extent in which the concept of CA explains India's choice of specializing in agriculture or other goods. So in my brain, right, I will recall what I've been taught in class by my teachers that comparative advantage is based on opportunity cost. And opportunity cost is linked to things like factor endowment. Once I know that, right, when I read extract one, okay, I want to think about how can India somehow have a comparative advantage in agriculture goods. So I'll recall that agriculture is what we call a very land intensive kind of good. Basically, in order to have a lower op cost in agriculture, you definitely need a lot of land. Okay, agriculture requires land to grow. And ideally, you should have also a huge population size so that the workers, there can be a lot of farm workers. So, having said all these things, right, when I look at this particular extract, I can understand better how India can emerge as such a major agriculture exporter. Okay, India is in the group of countries called the emerging economies. I call this BRIC. Okay, BRIC. That means BRIC stands for Brazil, Russia, India, and China. These four economies, right, are known as the emerging economies. Now, it is no surprise, right? If you look at Brazil, Russia, India, and China, they are characterized by a few common characteristics. They are huge in land size, right? And their population is also huge, BRIC. So it is no surprise that India and all the other three countries should have a comparative advantage in any kind of goods that are more land intensive as well as labor intensive. So I'll be thinking about all these concepts as I'm reading through extract 1. Now, take note that for all figures and charts that appear in your case study, almost every case study, right, will have some kind of figures or some kind of chart. So I look at this particular extract, particular chart. I notice that there are two distinct bars for each year. One is a shaded bar where the lines are shaded diagonally, and one is a more full shade, okay, the darker shade in the slide. Now, if you recall the questions that you have read in the past, right? The very first question of this case study requires me to estimate the value of imports. They make it a bit more difficult here because if you look at the legend of the two bars, none of them specifically tell you about imports, right? You get net exports and you get total exports, but no imports. Don't worry, okay? The economic concept you have to recall in your brain is that net exports, the one with the diagonal lines, is basically x minus m. So by some simple algebraic manipulation, if you want to get M, import expenditure, the value of imports, out of these two bars, you should know that X minus net exports equals to M. Or in this case, the total exports minus the net exports have to give you the value of imports. I hope you can understand this. So when it comes to the question in particular, right, the question asks for 2005 and 2013 only. So I will make my estimate using my eyes. Now, you look at this, right, you realize that depends on how sharp your eyes is, you might not get the correct value based on the y-axis. That's why the question put estimate. Okay, they are aware that not all of us, our eyes are that great, so there may be some parallax error, but don't worry. So zero in on 2005 and 2013, okay, get the estimated value based on the y-axis, and then you make your estimate. Don't worry if it is not precisely correct. And finally, note that the very first question has two command words, estimate and compare. So I will also remember to make a comparative statement between 2005 and 2013, whether is it higher, is it lower, things like that. So that would be the thoughts that are going to my head when I'm looking at the figure 1 after I've already read the questions. The next figure is this figure 2. Okay, so you have a dotted line that shows the wheat and rice stocks and a solid line that shows wheat and rice exports. Now, let me demonstrate to you what I mean when I'm thinking aloud. I realize that when I look back at question B requires me to link the minimum price diagram to explain this chart. Because if you look back at question B, right, they say with the aid of a diagram, means I must definitely use a diagram for question B. But after I use the diagram, right, I must make sure that the diagram helps to explain this changing trend for both wheat and rice stocks, which is increasing, as well as the increasing wheat and rice exports. So what's on my brain before I start doing the question will be this. Minimum price, right, in theory is when the government allows the firms to charge a higher price, higher than the free market price. Basically, the actual price that's actually sold cannot be lower than the minimum price. So for minimum price to be effective, it must be set higher. So the moment the minimum price is implemented, by the law of supply, I can say that the quantity supplied will definitely increase. So once you show that in your graph, you can easily explain the increasing dotted line, that the stocks is going up. And finally, when you later read extract 2, okay, you will know that the Indian government, they are exporting some of this surplus stock to the rest of the world. So that will explain the solid line. So you can see how beneficial it is to all of you if you are able to read the question first. Then once you read the question, once you are able to recall what are the economic concepts that are being tested, when you read the case extracts, when you read the chart, you are reading with a purpose. Now, this particular case study is very interesting because they have two charts and they have a table. So table 1 is terms of trade. Now, let me give you some background story. This was the first year and so far the only year where Cambridge explicitly tested this concept called terms of trade. Okay, terms of trade. This is the only year. Okay, so let me stress that in your coming A levels at the end of this year, sometimes you may get some new concept that probably in HCI we never taught you. You were not been taught. Okay, so notice, don't be too worried because anytime they do that, anytime they test something that they feel that not every junior college might explicitly teach that in their classes, they will give you explicit information so as to be fair to every candidate. So don't worry. Okay, in the A levels, when you see something new that's being asked that your HCI notes doesn't have it, okay, don't don't be so upset. Okay, it's not HCI's fault. Okay, they want to see how students can think on the spot. So to help you, right, they'll give you explicit information. So if you look at the table 1, they explicitly define the terms of trade right there. The index of export prices over the index of import prices times 100. Is that clear? But this time, right, of course, the terms of trade is elaborated more in your HCI notes in the appendix of your international economics notes. So if you look back at question C part 1, okay, you are comparing 2005 to 2013. So if you look at the numbers, right, from 105.2 to 131.1, so the terms of trade has actually increased. So that question C part 1 art will test you on to suggest two ways in which how this can increase. Okay, so we will teach you how to answer as we go through the next video. Finally, extract 2 and 3. So these two extracts, right? As I read these two extracts, now if I'm thinking aloud, right, what I'll say is this. These two extracts tell me one truth, that the Indian government is actively intervening in the agriculture market. If you think about it, right, the law of comparative advantage is a more like free market policy that the countries, if they were to specialize according to the comparative advantage, produce that good which it has a comparative advantage and trade, they would gain. Every country would gain. However, that assumes that in a sense there's little government intervention. But when I read extract 2 and 3, I realize that the Indian government is doing so much intervention. So the points in both extracts, right, will be very useful for me to use to answer the last two questions, which are the higher order questions, the 8-mark question as well as the 10-mark question. Okay, so both questions will require you to use the examples of government intervention in answering the question. So extract 2 elaborates on the minimum price policy. Extract 3 elaborates on the subsidy policy. So when I tackle the 10-mark question, the very last question in the case study, I must be aware that there are at least two policies I have to explain for that question. Subsidy and minimum price. So as I explain the policies, as I discuss whether is it justified or is it not justified, I'll make sure I make some reference to the various information in extract 2 and 3. Okay, extract 2 and 3. So when you look at this, right, you realize that, okay, so that's my last slide. So to end off this simple introduction on how to read case study, remember, read with a purpose, okay? Read activating the various economic schema into your head. So if you are able to do this, you'll find that it's rather a piece of cake. It's not too difficult to get a relatively good score for your case study. So thanks for listening to this video. I hope you have learned many things from this, and in the next video, I'll be tackling how to address the data responder lower order skills question. Thank you.